Emily had known John long before love had a name for it. They met in high school, not through chance or drama, but through quiet routine, assigned to the same study group because their surnames happened to fall close to each other on the register. John hardly spoke the first few meetings. He listened more than he talked, answering questions only when asked, his voice always low, always careful. He wore the same pair of slightly faded shoes every week, cleaned until the leather shone, as if effort could replace money. Emily noticed that before she noticed his intelligence. John came from a poor home. Not the kind that announces itself loudly, but the kind that teaches you to measure words, to ration hope, to sit quietly and not ask for more than necessary. He was the first son. Back home, his mother depended on him more than she ever said out loud. He had brothers and sisters who looked at him like he was already a man, even though he was still a boy trying to pass exams. One sibling was in SHS1, the rest still in junior level, their school fees a constant weight on his shoulders. Emily's life was different. She was her father's only child. Her mother had passed years earlier, leaving the house too quiet sometimes, but never lacking. Her father planned everything carefully: investments, education, the future. Emily never doubted that her life was already mapped out in straight lines. John's life, on the other hand, was written in pencil. Somehow, in that study group, those two worlds leaned toward each other. They studied together first, long afternoons in the library, heads bent over the same book. Then came conversations. Dreams whispered in low tones so no one else would hear. John spoke about wanting more than survival, more than struggle. Emily spoke about wanting meaning, not just comfort. With time, they began to see each other completely. The fear, the pride, the softness they never showed anyone else. By the time they realized they were in love, it felt like it had already happened weeks before. Emily's friends noticed too. They tried to be polite at first, but their disapproval lived in pauses and side glances. They asked questions that sounded harmless but weren't. What does he do again? Is his family okay? Are you sure this won't hold you back? Emily defended John quietly, firmly. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She just stayed. John knew the gap between their worlds. He felt it every time he walked Emily home, every time he stepped into her father's well-kept living room and straightened his shoulders just a little more. He never asked Emily for anything. Never money. Never favors. He carried his pride like fragile glass. Then the opportunity came. A rare chance to travel, across to the United States. Not a miracle, but close to one. A connection, an opening, a door that didn't open twice for people like him. It wasn't free. Nothing about it was. There were documents, tickets, processing fees, numbers that grew larger every time John wrote them down. He had the opportunity. He didn't have the help. John tried to decline quietly. He told himself this was how life worked. Some doors weren't meant for everyone. But Emily saw it in his eyes, the way hope fought with resignation. She pushed him to speak, to explain everything, to believe just a little longer. That was how she learned the truth. There was no money. Emily listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't promise. She just nodded. That night she barely slept. Her father's voice echoed in her head, the plans he had for that money, the importance of it, the trust he had placed in her. By morning she had already decided. Emily took the money. She didn't celebrate it. She didn't smile. Her hands shook when she transferred it. It was money meant for something important, something her father had worked for, but in her heart she told herself this was also important. This was a future. This was love. When she told John, he went silent. He refused at first. His pride flared. His voice broke. He asked her how she could even think of that. Emily didn't argue. She just looked at him and said, quietly, that she believed in him more than she feared the consequences. John promised her. He promised to return every Pasewa. Promised the moment his feet touched the ground. Promised this would only be temporary. Promised he would never forget. The departure was not glamorous. There were tears at the airport. Long hugs that felt like they were holding time itself. John left Accra with a small bag, borrowed courage, and a promise resting heavily on his chest. The start in the States was rough. Cold nights. Shared rooms. Jobs that bruised his hands and pride. But through it all they talked. Morning messages. Late night calls. Video chats where Emily laughed so he wouldn't hear the tiredness in her voice, where John smiled so she wouldn't see how much he was struggling. For a while, love survived the distance. For a while, communication was still everything. At first, Emily defended the silence. When John didn't call on time, she told herself he was tired. When messages arrived late, she blamed the time difference. She learned his schedule by heart, what hours he was likely working, when he might be asleep, when he would probably be too exhausted to talk. She adjusted herself around his absence the way people adjust furniture in small rooms. John still called, but not with the same warmth. Conversations became shorter, safer. He stopped talking about his struggles. He stopped asking about her day in detail. The laughter they once shared during video calls slowly disappeared, replaced by pauses that felt too loud. Emily noticed the first real change during a video call. John had answered, but his camera stayed off. "I'm just tired," he said. She nodded and smiled anyway. From then on, the camera stayed off more often than it stayed on. Emily didn't complain. She didn't question him. She remembered the sacrifices, the promise, the money she had taken. She reminded herself that this distance was the price of a better future. So she endured. Meanwhile, her friend noticed. "You don't talk about him like before," her friend said one evening. Emily laughed it off. Long distance does that. But the question stayed in her mind. Back in her father's house, the weight of what she had done began to press on her chest. Her father talked about plans that involved the missing money, his voice calm, trusting. Emily avoided his eyes during dinner. At night, she stared at her phone, waiting for John to reassure her, to remind her why she took that risk in the first place. But reassurance became rare. John started replying with one-word messages. Busy. Later. Tomorrow. Tomorrow often never came. Then came the missed calls. Not occasional ones, patterns. Emily would call twice, 3 times, and the phone would ring unanswered. Hours later, John would send a casual text. "Sorry, long day." No explanation. No apology deep enough to close the wound. Emily began to feel like she was interrupting something. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was how John had started sounding different. His voice carried a new confidence. Not the quiet determination she once loved, but something sharper. More distant. He spoke faster. He corrected her sometimes, cutting her off mid-sentence. "You wouldn't understand how things work here," he said once. The sentence stayed with her longer than it should have. Emily tried harder. She sent encouraging messages. Prayed for him. Reduced her own needs so she wouldn't feel like a burden. She told herself that this was what love looked like. Patience without reward. Unknown to her, John's world was expanding. He had met someone. She was confident. Educated. Fluent in his new environment. She laughed easily, spoke boldly, and never reminded him of his past struggles. She didn't know about the money stolen in his name. Didn't know about the promises made at the airport. To her, John was simply ambitious, a man who had made it on his own. And John liked that version of himself. Slowly, he began deleting parts of his old life. Photos disappeared from his social media. Emily's name stopped coming up in conversations. He told himself he had outgrown that chapter, that sacrifices were meant to stay behind. Emily felt it before she knew it. Her calls went unanswered for days. Messages were seen but not replied. When John finally called, his tone was rushed, distracted. "I think you're overthinking things," he said when she asked what was wrong. That was when Emily understood something had shifted beyond repair. One evening, after weeks of silence, she sent a long message. Not angry. Not accusing. Just honest. She reminded him of who they were. Of where they started. Of the money. Of the promises. John replied hours later with just 2 sentences. "I'm trying to build my life here. I don't think this is working anymore." No explanation. No apology. No gratitude. Just an ending sent like a notification. Emily stared at the screen until it dimmed. She didn't cry immediately. Shock wrapped around her first, tight and heavy. She replayed every sacrifice in her mind. The stolen money, the lies she told her father, the nights she prayed for him. And in that moment, something inside her went quiet. She didn't beg. She didn't chase. She simply stopped responding. John thought that was the end of it. He didn't know that silence, for Emily, wasn't surrender. It was the beginning of something else. Emily went to see John's mother on a quiet afternoon. She didn't announce herself. She didn't prepare a speech. She just showed up, carrying the weight of everything she had been holding in for months. The woman welcomed her politely, her face calm, almost too calm. They sat in the small living room where Emily had once shared laughter with the family, a place that now felt unfamiliar. When Emily asked about John, his mother hesitated for only a second. "He hasn't called in a long while," she said, folding her hands. "Life abroad is hard." Emily felt the lie immediately. It wasn't in the words, it was in the ease with which they were said. This was not the voice of a mother worried about her son. It was the voice of someone who knew more than she was willing to admit. Emily spoke carefully. She explained everything. The money. The promise. The silence. She didn't accuse. She didn't raise her voice. She only asked for one thing, that John be advised to return the money. Not for the relationship. Not for love. Just for decency. The room went quiet. John's mother sighed, long and tired, and finally spoke. "Emily, you must understand," she said. "John is trying to better himself, and all of us. Opportunities like that don't come twice. If he succeeds, this family succeeds." It was then Emily understood. This wasn't ignorance. This was support. John's mother believed the sacrifice, no matter who suffered, was justified. The money, the silence, even Emily's pain were all acceptable prices for what she believed was progress. Emily stood up slowly. "That money," she said, her voice steady but breaking underneath, "has brought more trouble into my life than losing your son ever did." She left without waiting for a response. A week later, everything collapsed at home. Emily's father found out about the missing money. Not through confession, but through necessity. He needed it. He searched for it. He asked questions. When Emily could no longer avoid them, she told the truth. Every word felt like tearing skin. The silence that followed her confession was heavier than shouting could ever be. Her father sat down. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was broken, not with anger, but with disappointment. That was harder to bear than punishment. The trust he had placed in her, the plans disrupted, the betrayal he never expected from his only child, it all sat between them like a wall. Emily cried for the first time since John sent his final message. Not for the relationship. For what her love had cost her family. Days passed in tension and quiet suffering. John still did not return the money. He did not respond to messages. He did not explain himself. Something in Emily hardened. Through frustration and shame, she turned to the only place where she still felt heard, her voice. She posted carefully at first. No names. Just truth. Then slowly, clarity replaced fear. She called John out. She labeled him what he had become in her story, a thief. Someone who took help and erased the hands that lifted him. Someone not worthy of anyone's sacrifice. The post spread. People asked questions. Old friends remembered. Screenshots of past messages surfaced. John's carefully rebuilt image abroad cracked under the weight of a story he thought he'd left behind. And then something unexpected happened. Emily's father forgave her. He didn't do it loudly. He didn't defend her actions. But one evening he called her into his room, sat her down, and spoke gently. He told her mistakes did not define her future. That love sometimes blinds the heart, but wisdom comes after pain. He chose not to abandon her the way someone else had. From that day on, he drew her closer. Emily began to heal, not completely, but enough to stand straight again. John, meanwhile, was still chasing opportunity. He didn't realize yet that the same past he tried to escape was quietly positioning itself to catch up with him. And this time, there would be consequences. Years passed. The silence between Emily and John hardened into something permanent. What once felt like unfinished business slowly became a closed chapter. Emily stopped checking her phone for his name. She stopped replaying conversations. Life moved forward, not gently, but firmly. John, meanwhile, was moving too. From the outside, it looked like progress. He began sending money home regularly. Not to Emily. Not to apologize. But to his family, through his younger brother. The instructions were always the same. The money was for a house. A place he could point to someday and say, "I built this." A symbol that his suffering abroad was worth it. The first transfer arrived with hope. But before the foundation could even be marked, his mother fell ill. It wasn't dramatic at first, just weakness, hospital visits that became longer than expected, bills that stacked quietly on tables. The money meant for cement and blocks was redirected to medication, tests, transport. Everyone agreed it was temporary. Temporary became permanent. Each new transfer dissolved into care, not construction. The house never rose beyond conversation. John complained sometimes, but guilt silenced him. This, he told himself, was still part of success, sacrifice for family. Back home, life reshaped Emily. She gained admission to the university and chose international relations. It wasn't accidental. She had learned, the hard way, how decisions crossed borders, how silence could ruin lives, how systems worked beyond emotion. She studied with intention. With quiet fire. Her father watched her closely. She had changed, less trusting, more observant, but stronger. He was proud of her in a way that didn't need words. In the United States, John's life began to crack in less visible ways. Pressure weighed on him. The house that wasn't being built. The money that vanished as soon as it arrived. The expectations he carried like armor. That was when he began keeping different company. Men who spoke confidently, moved fast, promised escape. They introduced him to substances they called relief. At first, it was occasional. A way to forget stress. A way to sleep without thinking too much. But habits don't announce themselves when they arrive. They slip in quietly, changing routines one night at a time. His girlfriend noticed first. She saw the mood swings. The impatience. The money disappearing faster than usual. The smell he tried to cover. Questions that didn't have steady answers. Arguments followed. She accused him of changing. He accused her of nagging. Trust thinned. The stability she once admired in him began to feel like performance. She pressed harder. John withdrew more. Home became tense. Outside, John's circle deepened. Bad decisions stacked on small lies. Late nights bled into mornings. Focus slipped. Paperwork was delayed. Responsibilities ignored. He assured himself he was still in control, but control was already leaving him. Back home, Emily thrived quietly. Her coursework sharpened her understanding of migration, legality, international systems. Stories discussed in class sounded familiar. She never told anyone why. She didn't need to. Sometimes, her name resurfaced in conversations around John, family mentions, old warnings, unspoken tension. He dismissed it. That life was behind him, he believed. Finished. But the truth was simpler. The life he built was standing on borrowed strength, unfinished foundations, and ignored consequences. And time, the same time he thought had erased his past, was only gathering evidence. John's mother recovered. Not all at once, but steadily. Strength returned to her limbs. Her laughter, once rare, began to fill the house again. The illness that had swallowed years of savings loosened its grip. For the first time in a long while, John felt relief. But relief came too late. While his mother healed, John sank deeper. What had started as an escape hardened into dependence. The men who once promised ease now demanded loyalty. Money disappeared faster than it arrived. Missed obligations piled up. His temper sharpened. His judgment thinned. The woman who once believed in his future watched him become someone she no longer recognized. Trouble found him the way it always does, quietly first. A missed deadline. An unpaid fine. An altercation that became a report. Then one morning, there were no more warnings. John was detained. The system he had ignored closed in around him with cold efficiency. There were no friends when he needed them. No excuses strong enough. No patience left. His status was reviewed, his record examined, his file reopened. The decision was simple. He would be deported. Sitting in that holding space, waiting for paperwork, waiting for time, John did the only thing he thought might still mean something. He sent every remaining cent he had back home. Everything he had saved. Everything that remained of years abroad. The money meant for the house that never rose. The alert came late at night. Back home, his younger brother's girlfriend was the one awake. She had been around long enough. Long enough to see transfers come in. Long enough to help sometimes. Long enough to know the PIN. She stared at the notification on the phone, heart racing, not with fear, but with opportunity. Before daybreak, she was gone. By the time the sun rose, the account was empty. Withdrawals made in pieces, in different locations until there was nothing left to take. No goodbye. No explanation. Just silence. John landed home with nothing but anger. The house he imagined waiting for him didn't exist. The money he thought would cushion his return was gone. Confusion turned to suspicion. Suspicion turned to rage. He went straight to his brother. Voices rose. Accusations flew. Denials collapsed under pressure. A fight broke out, raw, desperate, ugly. Furniture shifted. Neighbors gathered. Blood was drawn. In the end, there was no winner, only brothers standing on opposite sides of betrayal. John sat alone that night, surrounded by the ruins of plans that never survived truth. Almost a week later, the final blow came. Emily sued him. The papers arrived quietly. No insults attached. No emotional message. Just facts. Evidence. Transfers. Dates. Agreements. The money taken. The promise broken. The years passed without repayment. John read the documents slowly. For the first time since he boarded that plane years ago, he fully understood what he had done, and who he had become in the process. Emily had not chased him. Had not begged him. Had not ruined herself seeking closure. She waited. And when she acted, she did so with clarity. Emily didn't attend court with bitterness in her eyes. She spoke calmly. She told the truth. Her father sat behind her, steady, present, unbroken. She asked for nothing beyond what was owed. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It simply corrected the imbalance. John lost what little credibility he had left. Whatever story he once told about success abroad died under documentation. His family saw the truth clearly at last. The future he dreamed of rebuilding had to begin from ashes. Emily walked away lighter. Not because she won, but because she no longer carried what wasn't hers to bear. Love had cost her once. Wisdom paid her back later. And in the end, what destroyed John wasn't distance, or poverty, or even betrayal. It was the belief that sacrifice could be erased. And that the people who built you would never ask to be repaid.